So thanks again, Sarah, for inviting me this year. I've been earlier, as some of you might know, here in the beginning of the year, and I'm afraid that some of the overlaps will be, of course, for that reason, a bit there. What I discussed with this maybe half audience, I don't know if everyone was there, similar to my argument today. I'd like to discuss the topic of trained judgment. Maybe one would say that architects today deal with an enormous expansion of the profession. We have on the one hand, there where we talked a century ago about functionality, now have to deal with so many efficiencies, so many complexities around the way how, from regulations to the whole complex aspects of knowledge from your specialist, not only my specialist but also the specialist from the client, come together in the way how we generate a work. And that's on the one hand one part of the expansion and extension of our profession. On the other hand, what is the beauty is that we on the other hand can refer to art, to fashion design, product design, and can give our architecture so much different interpretations that that I often think that the beauty of that is that we can not only separate them as two entities as we used to do in architecture, maybe in a time where we thought more about the modern project. Today we can put these different qualities of architecture into a circle, even sometimes I twist a circle, and then it's difficult then today to point at what is active in the project. When I talk about these two expansion levels of the field, but recently I'd like to talk about the phenomenon of the what I would like to call the scientific self of the architect. So on the one hand, saying that we are somewhere a bit a scientist. On the other hand, we have to deal with the self, with making choices, the imperative I, and the way how we gain knowledge through the way how we produce, and towards the public, because that's what I like to also discuss today. What is it what we do, what is how interpreted towards the public. So this idea of gaining knowledge is not only that what we develop through the relationship of the way how we develop this interpretive I, and how it's then connected to the way how we with our hands make our work operative. It's this trial relationship between the way how we see our work, how we learn from it, and how we handle the work. It's maybe sometimes that in the process of the way how we design, that we might come into an oceanic feeling, whereby we might be lost in the amount of incredible qualities of regulations and topics we have to deal with. On the other hand, talking about criticality, is that today I believe that it is so fascinating maybe to go back to that what was earlier called in the last century operative criticality. So what do we do with the instrument of architecture? What is the apparatus of architecture? How can we make it in a new way objective again? And what are the structural relationships in the relationship towards the object of architecture? Maybe the object of architecture is maybe in the future not so important anymore, there where we have to think about these relational aspects. So it's more the aspect of the way how we gain knowledge and overlap knowledge, and how we transport this knowledge into our work. So we become trained experts. In this first project, I'd like to bring forward this idea of how, in a small installation we did for the Museum of Modern Art in Philadelphia, where we played with the idea of the holiday home. So, what is it to have a holiday home? Why do we often escape so easily towards a place where we'd love to be, or a place where we'd like to be, even when it is not our holiday home, but maybe a place where we just like to escape to? And having myself also put another place, another location, I can't be critical of it, but I often thought, why don't we bring the holiday home home? Why don't we allow an interpretation of the way how that form of escapism can be brought home? And talking about windows, here the openings of the pavilion refer to all these different places where often I have to deal with myself, with the amounts of traveling. A form of calmness is maybe necessary to have that form of escapism, necessary in the way how you transport yourself from one place to the other. That's why I often take the same room in all these different hotels where I'm staying. And I know all the numbers of these rooms. So this idea of the holiday home as an instrument, or maybe as an prototype, as a pavilion, is then, as maybe already said by Sarah, is then transported in a serial manner towards the projects. Like, for instance, this case in a theater in Lelystad in Holland, whereby the idea of the vertical foyer becomes a foyer whereby you constantly have vistas, in a way how one can see the public move in the different realities of the theater. So I didn't want to give an experience to the way how one would perceive the theatrical in the theater itself, but even in the foyer you step into a lot of different realities. So for me, there where we produce an architecture, it is important that we can introduce a form of a parallax view, that the view is not in front of us anymore, that the view can be behind us, and the views can be under us or above us, that they can be kaleidoscopic. This was explicitly, I hope, quite essential in the exhibition we had in Harvard in the midst of last year, where we explained through these images who were projected over different walls, that you could step in these images. And sometimes you would not know which person was real or not, like the second person there in the back, or the third person is in the photograph but is in the same height, etc. Projected in the pavilion where I talked about. The whole exhibition was about this aspect of the pavilions, and explained that idea that through motion things matter. Through motion concepts matter. Through motion we discover slowly more and more where maybe the image is not the most important. The image needs to often create after images, as we have often argued. So after images, in order to know that when you step back from the object, that you maybe later discover what the object was all about. And similarly, in a lot of work, even from the beginning onwards, we have always thought that it is not so necessary to make buildings referring to who they are or what they are. Like, this could be a museum, it could be a department store, it could be an electricity station, or it could be an artwork. And that it is a public building, that it is celebrating the idea of being a lamp within the city, was the approach we brought forward to the client, what was appreciated only a few months after it had its different effects. Similarly, with this house, a client who loved the landscape where he placed his house had an interest, strange enough, in gold. What was very difficult to bring into the project, I thought, but although I found very specific glass used in the 60s, especially in Spain, here into the project, and similarly he created these after images of the landscape, and it played an ironic role towards the way how the client loved the images, but at the same time his golden glass within this project. But the idea was in the way how this house came together in the central moment of there where you had this open, you could say, semi-public moment within the house where the family could meet, and in the front is the living room. It secludes itself also from the moment where one can separate oneself from the moments one meets within the central part of the house. So here, geometry, architecture, the whole construction of the non-column space is articulating a moment of interactiveness, a moment of publicness, a moment of a construct, a public construct. But what I think is a form of communication you can introduce with architecture, whereby it becomes spatial. But spatial in a sense whereby space is not anymore to be seen in a space-time relationship as we know it. As I explained also in the talk I gave about the twist. Here the notion of the twist is a physical twist, but the twist can be read as a metaphorical twist in the relationship to the way how when one walks through this museum for a car, one almost drives through this museum, and one can constantly experience similarly what I said before, that spaces are following you. So here this idea of the kaleidoscopic, the spatial, and being in a time, ramping down in one spiral and then combining it with another spiral, so there are two spirals and there's always an overstep possible. You're not in one space-time condition to be found here, but you're walking within a space-time, and then maybe in another time there where you constantly don't know where you are within the building because you see people walk on the other side where you don't know where they came from. And similarly, like in this latest project, it's very hard to grasp when you come into the heart of this building how many stories it is. Is it you think in the beginning, is it maybe 30 stories, or when you are a little bit further away and see it in perspective, you think that it is only 4 stories high. So this constant play between the different non-existence of the proper scale related to many structures who come together here, many structures of the way how the invisible of the architecture comes here together is the key of what I think lately is the key of the way how we can bring these qualities together in the work. And I mean by invisible that what we don't experience, like this tornado is introduced in order to make there where there is a fire in this museum I showed before, to suck out the smoke in almost 10 minutes, by this we could introduce a total open building, and this was an invention introduced by a couple of engineers and ourselves in order to make sure that we could do a building whereby we had no compartmentalization, and we could reduce with that an enormous amount of materials in the building, and also a certain amount of cost. And I learned so much from this almost scientific, highly technological innovation in this project, because it gave me an insight of the way how we can rethink architecture through its scientific innovation. So if you think about architecture today, it's maybe about this aspect of how we learn and train ourselves to how to judge. That what we connect, like all that information you find in the background of this statement is to be found in the complexity of the geometry of a part of a building we are recently developing. So it's in a way a plan. These are the plans of our buildings of the future. We lately don't work with architects alone anymore. We often work with guys who have been even working for Google or other places in order to program our knowledge. So if design is somewhere subjective, And construction is objective, I lately argue, and architecture is trained judgment. We have to know where to combine the information and the eye. And the eye plays the role, of course, in there. It's not so that objectivity is a phenomenon we know as there where we don't make choices. Of course, the way how we learn, how the eye and the instrument of that what we make, and we don't make it anymore with a hammer, although we still have, luckily enough, a craft, but the craft becomes complexer and complexer. But there's still, luckily, that individual aspect of the craft, what is connected to this phenomenon of objectivity. As we before used to copy nature in a totally different manner, and then inventing instruments like the telescope, the perspective, as we all know, photography, this whole aspect of the mechanical aspect of objectivity, and I'm boring here reading you all. You have to read this book of Lorraine Deston and Peter Gallison on the phenomenon of objectivity. Is that mechanical objectivity gives a kind of neutral aspect to it, the way how we gain knowledge, you could say. Like for instance in this case of how we produce or relational qualities in the way how we design. And it's not, of course, only the digital where what I'm promoting here, but it is particularly the way how we can gain through serial production a new insight of how we then can turn it into an architecture as explained before. So if there was a handmade architecture like in the way how we drafted or worked before, and we could create variations with it and typological innovation with it, then there was maybe in the modern era the phenomenon of the mechanical. But today in the digital, we have lost, I think, the intentions of the digital, in my opinion. I believe that we have gone into a world of form-making and stylistic references is there, where I do believe that it doesn't matter how we refer to any style. Like you probably all know the box to blob argument I've brought forward also in the beginning of the year. Who cares about the box or the blob? It's more the transformative moment of there where we can find so much more to that what is far more fascinating in the way how we proportion information instead of form. So the proportioning of information is today not so easy to map, because as I said, we have to train ourselves how to select and how to distribute information. But today, what is fascinating is that we can develop far more bottom-up design approaches. So when, for instance, when we talk to a specialist and critical advisors, they might come from the cultural or the engineering field, or the specialists within our own group. The overlap of information and the gaining of knowledge and the platforms we have learned to work with within also UN Studio is that what is the most fascinating is that the division is so fascinating there, where we slowly turn ourselves towards the direction of a synthesis whereby we make our solutions within the group. So collaboration is there, but it is operative, and that's what brings me to this notion of criticality, what was discussed this morning. I think the criticality can be only fascinating there where we make it operative, where we make it instrumental, and there where it selects information in a sense there where we know there where the project works. So that's maybe a very simple statement to say there where a project works, but it needs to work there on that level, as I explained in the beginning, that it generates more than only one message. So that there are more different complex layers of messages to be found in the way how you can observe the object. But it needs to be connected to this process, because otherwise architecture becomes highly singular. And it doesn't become a complex apparatus as architecture always was. architecture might then deal with segmentation within the process and doesn't overlap this knowledge. I give you, and then I'm not going to talk too long. In this bio-informed process, where we, of course, look ourselves still a lot towards nature. In a project, we gained all the different levels of the brief and the special aspects we wanted to bring into the project through programming. For instance, in this case, the relationship between the structure and the facade. In this project, what was quite interesting is that we discovered if we would put all the installations in the concrete, and you might know about it, it's called concrete core activation. Then we would reduce in each floor almost close to 30 centimeters in the height of the building, per floor, and then over the whole height an enormous amount of meters. So with this we could make a highly compact building. And again, reduce down materials, cost, and create far more compact, call it in brackets, efficiency. But on the other hand, it gave us an enormous amount of possibilities to rethink the way how we dealt with energy within the organization of the building through the compartmentalization of the individual relationship between some of the spaces where one works within the office. So sometimes within this double facade, what we introduced, we were able to make a relationship there where it was possible to compartmentalize also the energy within the building up of the heat within the facade, transporting towards the interior of the building. So these are some of the earlier studies, how that then was transported through all this integral, almost scientific research towards the whole structure of the building. And of course, this was then related to the active and passive aspects of the way how this building could connect itself towards the way how different layers of this aspect of the science came together in this project. But in our latest research, what we discovered through the way how we collect and document, it is today possible to make projects who generate totally different levels of information, spatial information, than we had known before. And that's what I would like to argue. It's not about the techniques and the design techniques alone, but it is about that what it can do. The spatial effects of it are not only there to be read in its different layers of meanings, as I explained, but also the spatial effects who draw you into an articulation of a space, but is so far more different in its textural experience than maybe we had worked with before. Like, of course, we talk a lot about textures in architecture today, and I showed you even a series of textures within the facades of the building, but of course we can bring these textures also to the internal world of our work. And here a project for music theater in Graz is playing with that principle, as maybe that what I showed you before, where the internal world of music is not to be experienced in the theater itself, but also be to look at when you enter this theater. But as I said, it's more about how we generate these knowledge platforms today and the way how we operate. It's not about the parameters of design, the smart parameters of design alone, as everyone talks about right now in architecture. It's not about innovative materials. It's not about attainability, a topic I like to recently use a lot. Attainability, more that what is so much required lately and it's so much discussed, and that is affordability. So how you can combine these two, often I read into attainable and the possible of that what you can produce in an architecture. But without this trained judgment of the way how we guide knowledge, how we select it, and how we make with that public construct, I think it is impossible to make an architecture what is future-oriented. And simply, maybe with my last statement, I'd like to say that our architecture, if we compare it to the world of product design and the world of building, in a way, is so complex, because I've over the years struggled with the building industry. Although, I mean, as you can see, we have learned through operative digital process and manufacturing techniques, we have gained a lot. But the world outside is still in, I would like to say, in a Walkman phase. Whereas I mean, in a Walkman phase, in the sense of there where we have the knowledge today and produce an architecture that is in the iPhone phase. So what is it that we not try harder in order to push the boundaries on a technological, innovative, maybe call it a scientific level, more in order to produce the artistic of that what we have had always in architecture to a further level, a little bit more. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.